Okay, let's get started. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the special Regeneration podcast. We'll lead a podcast every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time on a topic that is specifically related to helping our family firms kind of manage through this pandemic. And today we have a very timely topic and a renowned guest speaker that will field your questions. As a reminder, please either type your question into the chat feature or on the Zoom chat feature, or text me directly, or even better, if you feel like asking the question yourself, just signal me with a little hand wave and I will call on you. Now keep in mind, it's possible I may call on you even if you're not waving with a question. So just be prepared for that. Okay, wow is all I can say. The reason for this timely topic is that this week is the start of what's been referred to over and over again as the peak crisis in many locations. While the daily counts continue upward, unemployment filings have increased beyond anything that any of us can recognize, certainly in our lifetime. 17 million new unemployment claims just in the last 3 weeks. And if this isn't enough, our national debt, which has already been on the incline, has jumped and will continue to jump, which puts the future viability of many social programs in question. All of this is laid over the rumors that society is changing in ways that don't sound very pleasant to us. This morning I was reading in the newspaper where some are recommending that we no longer shake hands with each other, and that there's a second wave of this coming. Don't let our guard down. Now, I'm sorry to fuel the stress and worry, but the looming question that we have is, what do we do? What do we do about all this? I've only heard one of our nation's leaders. I'm sure there's more out there, but I haven't heard him. But only one of our nation's leaders, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of the state of New York, even addressed the psychological impact that this is having on our country and our population. Well, to help us understand this and to help build our psychological immunity is Dr. Kevin Gilliland. Kevin, wave your hand so people can see you, and just wave it back and forth. If they're, I think we've got about 35, 36 people on. Not all of them are on camera, however, but for those that can see Dr. Gilliland. Well, Dr. Gilliland is the founder of a firm called Innovation 360. It's a mental health and wellness clinic with a national reputation for treating and supporting individuals really through a uniquely individualized program for each. Kevin, or locally many people refer to him as Dr. K, is the author of a book, Struggle Well to Live Well, which is a little gem of a book. It's very readable, 60 lessons. Pick it up anywhere online, or any of the bookstores. It's also in many bookstores in hard print, but since they're all closed right now, your best bet to get Struggle Well, Live Well is to go online. In his book, he quotes, and I love this quote. It applies to everybody. You're going to struggle, so let's learn how to do it well. Kevin is featured and has been featured in CBS affiliate stations and ABC affiliate stations across the country. I think he's in the current edition of People magazine, which is actually an academic read for everybody. He's been in Men's Health, CNN, and so many other places. Now, we're going to conduct this interview as we have in the past, and that is just simply asking questions. To me, over the last 2 days, one of them came in last night. And so, Dr. K, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of jump right in. And why don't we start with just give us literally 45 seconds or so on your background and training as a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, I've always worked in the field of clinical psychology, but whether on the business side, I spent some years with Blue Cross Blue Shield, with Johnson and Johnson, and on sort of their medical affairs divisions. But I've always enjoyed working with people, and I probably 10, 15 years ago started to get just curious about the link between our physical health and our mental health. And working with employer groups is really where one of those critical intersections occurs. And we don't always need the long version of a conversation to help us move forward. And it's why I wrote Struggle Well, Live Well, is that sometimes we just are missing a piece that gets us moving forward. And so I've been interested in looking at little changes having big impacts for a while now. So have worked pretty broadly with addictions as well as mood and anxiety. So I don't know if that gives a quick thought, but that's
Okay.
a quick short one.
Okay, so these are just coming in kind of fast and furious. I'm not going to be able to take them all because they're disappearing on me pretty quick. But let me go ahead and ask one from last night. Is there something wrong with me mentally?
Yeah.
Probably not. An abnormal response to an abnormal situation. So talk about that, please.
Yeah, it's been such an odd flood of emotions and experiences for everybody, and it wasn't gradual. It happened overnight, and it happened in some really critical areas that we didn't realize are so important for us, which is relationships, our routine, and our purpose and work and what that does for us and how it helps us. And so we have this, and I love that quote about I don't feel normal right now. Well, you shouldn't, because it's not normal right now. But I think sometimes we struggle to just accept that, yeah, no, that's actually my starting point right now, is I should feel really unsettled or uncertain, because whether it's me or the people in my world, that's clearly the environment we're in. So that should influence and change what are my goals today, whether it's work, personal, or with family members. And you know, while our work environment shifted overnight, it takes us a while to shift how we think and move and work.
Remember, type your question in on the chat bar or raise your hand and I'll call on you. Dr. Gilliland, why am I so tired? You know, I want to comment on that literally the first week of this self-quarantine thing, that shelter in place, I found myself napping in the morning and in the afternoon. In fact, I know there's people here that even on the call right now, I'm looking at them that have slept, you know, an additional 4 to 5 hours a day. They've reported to me. Why are we so tired?
And I so appreciate you saying it, because I've known you a while and I've never thought of you as a napping kind of guy. You always feel like this sort of, you always have energy. I literally was talking to a lady yesterday that's a pretty active lady, and she was like, I should not feel this low of energy and this lethargic. I haven't done anything. And that's part of the problem, is when our mood, and we don't realize how much stress we carry on a daily basis because it's usually attached to our job. This is stress and pressure that is disruptive in a way that we don't notice it. And one of the places we actually notice it, get lower energy and lower, we tend to say motivation. I don't have any motivation. I don't have any get up and go, and I'm constantly sleepy. When our mood gets down or our mind is constantly working, it's burning fuel. And when that happens, whether we're sleeping or not, we have this lethargy to us. And one of the big symptoms, I'm not saying we're depressed right now, but one of the symptoms of a down mood, and men experience this more than women, is this physical slowing and fatigue and lethargy. And so it should be one of those things that signals us of, okay, I need to do something even though I don't feel like it, because I've got to make sure that doesn't get out of hand.
Very good. Very good. Okay, another question has come in right here. Let me read it, please. Oh, we've heard of the, I'm paraphrasing the question, but the question is, we've heard that COVID-19 stands for gaining 19 pounds. And what does that, why is that funny all of a sudden? Because we are eating as much or more than ever, and yet we're in a pandemic. So viruses, like one of the things about viruses is that you lose weight when you become ill with a virus,
Right.
and that the body is, I don't know if we're building up our immunity by eating, or we're reducing our immunity by eating. So why don't you just comment about the COVID-19 pounds?
Okay, so it's a great question. If you step back, I'm not opposed to social media. We just have to be mindful how we consume it. But when you step back, what you see is a lot of humor or serious conversations about food and about alcohol. You see both of those. And one of the things we have to be careful of is binging. And binging, we often eat out of stress and boredom. This is a stress that doesn't quite have an endpoint yet. And there's so much uncertainty that we'll end up eating, whether it's grazing all day or we eat when we're actually not hungry. We eat for the same reasons that we abuse other substances, is because it has this emotional soothing aspect to us. We'll eat foods we don't typically eat. And you combine that with, I can't now get out and do my normal stuff. So oddly enough, most of us have seen more people out walking, and actually you're like, oh, that seems to be good. We seem to be more active. Fitbit said that overall, last week compared to that same week a year ago, physical activity was down like 10%, 12%. So we're consuming more calories because we're anxious and nervous and not sleeping well or sleeping too much. We're eating and watching TV. We're doing all of the unhealthy ways of interacting with food. And, I say, one of the things I tell people is just be mindful if you're binging anything, because binging anything is not good for us, whether it's a series on Netflix, whether it's food, or whether it's alcohol. We have to be careful about how we consume. And eating actually has a significant impact on our overall health, because when we're eating healthy, we're psychologically more healthy and physically healthy. And to your point, obesity and being overweight increases our risk for catching a virus, because it compromises our immune system. Because if you're overweight, your risk of being borderline diabetic or of having cardiovascular disease increases. And there are a significant number of people that contract COVID or suffer really negative courses of COVID that have cardiovascular problems. And a lot of those problems are related to weight. And so don't obsessively wash your hands and wear a mask when you're by yourself and then eat poorly, because you are weakening your immune system by eating poorly. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But I want to go back to something you said about binging. How many episodes of Homeland qualifies as a binge?
Yeah. Well, if it's a good show, then you sort of waive the binging criteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I would recommend, and I'm not saying for you, just someone who might have done that with Homeland, watch an episode, maybe two, and then get up and move around. Go do something else, and then you can come back and don't eat, but go and physically move, and then come back and watch another episode or four.
Okay. Ellie has a question. Ellie, please.
Good morning, Kevin. Hey, I have found myself feeling, and I think I've heard this from many of my clients as well, is that there's been a ambient anxiety.
Mm.
There's this thing that's kind of underneath, right? As you spoke to a few minutes ago. But then there are moments of kind of overt peak anxiety, whether that comes out in a short temper, whether that comes out in obsessively cleaning, whether that comes out in real sadness. I know I found myself crying. I mean, kind of I mean, it kind of seems like it's for no reason, but in reality, I miss my family. I'm missing the things that I'm sad for the things I'm missing days and potentially weeks away from today. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it does. It does. And I so appreciate it. That's what's so strange for this, because some of you guys are in a line of work where you still have to go to the office. You provide essential services. And so, in my case, we're still meeting with some people in the office because we work with folks that have some pretty severe mental health conditions or addictions that we see face to face, and some we do on the phone. So my day is fairly similar to how it used to be. Now, my wife, who hopefully is not on this and y'all don't know, she's one of the angriest kindergarten teachers you've ever seen. But I'm quite certain she's like every other teacher, because it's all the parts you dislike about being a teacher and not the enjoyable parts. And so she's frustrated and anxious about working from home in an environment that you would never work from home like that and try to teach people in another home. But she's really sad about not being with those kids. And she's worried for the parents that never wanted to homeschool. That's why they have kids in a school that are having to homeschool. And they've got some anger and frustration about trying to work, but trying to keep my kid going in school. And I don't know this subject. And so you get this really strange mix of emotions like sadness, gratitude that I'm able to work, because as I was talking to somebody the other day about the handful of people that I know personally that aren't working and don't have incomes are physicians and doctors and small business owners, which is a very strange thing. And so, right, you have that worry and that fear mixed with emotions, and that mixture of worry and stress and a down mood, if it gets significant, is particularly toxic to our bodies and our psychology. It actually compromises our immune system in a significant way.
So Kevin,
I'm sorry, how do we kind of bring ourselves out of that? How can we be, both kind of monitoring, accepting, but also kind of getting ourselves out of that?
Okay, so yeah, great question. If you think about, and there's a chance that some of you know somebody or can relate to this, because there's roughly 60 to 80 million Americans that deal with chronic pain. And when you look at chronic pain, you have this, every day you have a level of pain, but then you have what's called breakthrough pain. It peaks up. So every day we have a burden of stress that we never used to have. And then we have that breakthrough anxiety. You want to try to resolve and reduce as much as you can every day, because it will have a cumulative effect. It'll start to disrupt sleep. We'll start to eat in ways we shouldn't eat. We get agitated. We might get withdrawn. And so you talked about one of the things, which is distraction. When you notice your mind is stuck on a loop, do something different. Just disrupt that rut that our minds will get hung up, because our minds, you have to remember, what do our minds really dislike? They really dislike boredom and isolation. Our minds do not do well with that. And so you go, okay, how do I engage this in a subject or activity or something complex that I can't do this and this at the same time? We do not multitask. We just don't. And if you think you multitask, you absolutely don't. the data is terrible on multitasking. So you'll see it with anxiety. Like for instance, exercise is one of the great things to do to reduce your anxiety. But do the kind of exercise where you have to concentrate and focus. Like I can run and worry at the same time to where I end up walking because I forget to run because I'm so anxious. But when I do yoga, I'm worried that I'm going to hurt myself or fall on somebody next to me. So I can't worry and do yoga at the same time, which is great for giving my mind a break from whatever legitimate worry I have. And that's what you want to do is you want to allow that. What we've done and what stress and worry is we've accidentally triggered our fight and flight response. And in the short term, that's really good. A long-term strategy, it's bad because we release cortisol and endorphins and all these chemicals that in large amounts over a long time are toxic, compromise our immune system. So when we can turn it off and slow it down, it's a win. So we want to look to. Does that make sense? Or go out and weed eat the yard. That's a great business.
So whoever has the weed eater, please mute. Thank you.
But I do like that quick application to go out and weed eating like that. Or blow the leaves off. Do that. That's actually really good too. Seriously. But mute it while you're doing that. So
okay, I've muted who I thought it was, the culprit. Kevin, let's think about where some of these people on the call are. We have obviously, rents, people that are paying rent, and all of a sudden their income, their revenue drops, unexpectedly, immediately. We've got financial concerns. Most people do. Now we have to actually terminate or lay off people. Owner of the company is making some of these very difficult decisions. What do we do? And how can we bring to bear in a decline that is truly in many ways beyond our control for most people? How do we stay in a position of calmness to make better decisions? Because we know research is full of data that says when you're anxious and stressed and worried, you make poor decisions or less than optimal decisions. How do we advise the people on this call and others, not only for themselves, but for the people that may work underneath them, to find a spot, a psychological kind of worry-free zone to make competent, wise business decisions?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's challenging for business owners is the same thing that's challenging for people in the helping profession, counselors, physicians, nurses. We are usually not in the situation with our employees or with our clients. We usually have distance from it. We're all in this. And so probably the biggest thing, and the research is significant on this, we ignore little things that have a big impact on our psychological health. Because what's most critical right now to lead an organization and make very difficult decisions with people you care about and with a business you love, you have to be as mentally and physically sharp as you can. And you go, yeah, Kev, that's really great in theory, but do you know how many hours I'm working? I'm like, yeah, because I'm doing the same. But I do know this: sleep is power, food is fuel, and movement is medicine. And those three fundamentals make you physically stronger and psychologically more clear than anything you can do. So I would monitor and check your sleep very closely. Make sure it's 7 or 8 hours, And that means you have to be more active of eliminating things that aren't really focused on what you're trying to achieve right now. You just don't have the margin to do some of those things. And you've probably had to do that at other times in your life. Probably when you started the business, stepped into the business, expanded the business. There are times in our life where we have to be pretty stingy with what we do and what we watch. And I was talking with a really neat lady yesterday, and she was talking about she has to be really efficient right now. And it's at that same point of I got to be careful what I'm consuming that may pull my mood down or increase my anxiety, because I have to make a lot of difficult decisions, and I've got to be at my best. And being at my best means I don't want to get this. And if I do get this, I want to get over it as quickly as I can, which means a good immune system. And I'm not going to make good decisions if I'm sleep deprived or I've been physically inactive. So it's doing those things. And again, there's a piece of, I think we just have to recognize that today, I may just have to make the best bad decision for the company, because all of the decisions on the board are bad. And I just got to make that decision. And at times like this, we can overthink and overprocess. And we know that from really good studies on mood and anxiety. And we have to process and think enough to make a good decision and then move on. So overprocessing and over-consuming information actually impairs our performance.
Okay. Andrew, Clyde, let's call on you. I think you're on mute right now.
Would you just say those three things again? Kevin, you said exercise is medicine, food is fuel, and sleep is what?
Sleep is power, food is fuel, and movement is medicine. For instance, Andrew, so they've done a couple of studies on if you have a history of cardiovascular disease, about 30% of the people with cardiovascular disease will experience a depression. It occurs so much it ought to be talked about as a side effect of that disease. Well, when they look at why are those folks depressed, what symptom? One of the studies looked at almost all of the depressed mood loaded on one symptom: physical inactivity. That being physically inactive pulls our mood down. Now, we don't know entirely why. Some of it is when we're physically active, we encounter other people. We also release some good and the feel-good chemicals. And it also increases our normal food intake. And there's a lot of things attached to it. So there are literally dozens of studies on all three of those demonstrating positive outcomes. And even they did a study on depression with normal treatment, counseling, and medications versus exercise 3 times a week. And you probably don't remember seeing that study because it really didn't get a lot of press, but the results were very similar. So those are 3 great areas to start with. And me personally, I look at them every day. And some, like yesterday, didn't do good on sleep, did okay on food, and didn't move as much as I wanted to. Right? And so every day reassess, all right, what have I got to do today? And which ones did I not do yesterday? And I want to do one of those today. My feelings don't matter right now when it comes to those things. Just like it doesn't matter how I feel, I'm going to take my medicine for my heart disease. That's how we have to look at those behaviors. I don't care how I feel. I'm going to bed now because I need to be at my best tomorrow.
Sleep is power. Food is fuel. Movement is medicine. Sleep is power. Food is fuel. Movement is medicine. Wow, that's great. Powerful. Okay, Ellie, I'm going to get to you in just one second, but let me get to a question here. So, what can we do to help our employees? What are some specific steps or events or something? What can we do? Because we're feeling it, but they're feeling it too. So what can we do about that?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest things we've lost that none of us realized was so critical to our work was interacting with other people. Um, we just didn't realize how important that was. If you have employees that are now having to work from home, we can touch on some things there. I spent 5 years in a home office with Johnson & Johnson with medical affairs, and it is unbelievably difficult to do and challenging. Um, and so expectations for employees working at home have got to be different. It is not doing the same job, just in a different office. So I think some knowledge about that and coaching and helping home-based employees manage the challenges that exist there. We can talk about those a little bit. But if you're still coming into the office, we have to social distance. But the isolation and lack of relationships is probably one of the number one things I hear from employers as well as individuals. So it's how can we do that in a way that's engaging and relieves stress, but also gets our jobs done. And whether that's doing creative fun stuff with employees through Zoom or teleconference or in the office, but with a distance, I think doing things that are mentally healthy and adjusting goals at work, I think those are some things people are doing. And then the other piece is don't be afraid to talk about the emotions and the stress involved in this current time and checking with them about how they're doing it, managing it. It's probably one of the biggest mistakes I see individuals, employees making is consuming too much information from sources that are a little bit questionable. And so just helping and coaching and providing them with resources, they don't need to be long, but resources that help them manage their own mood and emotions. Some resources may be unemployment related, some may be more mental health related. And there are a lot of avenues for people to get plugged into that. And just, and some of it too is people are reluctant, and I get it, or have ideas about therapy or stuff. Look, you just need some counsel. You need some coaching about your psychological health through this time. And whether that's if you have an employee assistance program or there's some great information that's available, like from National Institute of Health about managing our mood or managing worry and stress, that are just PDFs that you can get to people. That information can be incredibly powerful. And I would talk about it with employees. It's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. It's absolutely normal to be feeling the way you're feeling. Here's some resources, and some of those things are going to help because we don't all need therapy right now. But unfortunately, we don't have one of the most therapeutic things for us, which is work and those relationships or other relationships. So you got to look at how can we help people bridge that in this time. Does that answer a little bit?
I think it does. And, this is an interesting phenomena that we're dealing with right now. Over the last few years, the number one telecommute firm in America, likely, don't know that, but Google, FaceTime, they've come back and said the telecommuting thing does not work as effectively. We're changing that model. And here we are now as a nation thrown into the telecommute. And we know that it's not as effective. And part of it may be that there is a dearth of information about how to do that effectively. So for the HR and for the owners and for the folks that can bring this back to their organization, I think what you're saying is that there should be some emphasis on how do you gain more from telecommuting as opposed to, hey, just go home and figure it out. And that's been the model that I think we're working with at the moment. So
if you do nothing else but correct that, your employees are going to feel better. They're going to be less anxious. And when we help people manage their stress and feel better, what gets impacted? Productivity, enjoying what they do. But we have to be proactive and going, look, we got to reset our goals. even though you as an employer have conflicting goal, I'm trying to stay in business, but I'm also trying to help shift some of the goals. There are some resources out there about helping people transition into home office environment. And I mean, now mind you, I must, and I'm mildly embarrassed to say, I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist, so you would think I would know better. I go from an office environment, collaborative environment, to being home-based with a territory. I thought I was going to lose my mind for a month or two. It's such a disruptive thing on so many levels, but I stepped into it. I wanted to, I knew it, I kind of knew ahead of time. We literally stepped into it overnight. So we've got to provide people with some guidance and structure on how to do that well.
Okay, one of the questions that came in that I think is really good, and you already brought it up. So what about, you mentioned that you were doing online therapy or video Zooming therapy and such. How effective is video therapy versus the in-person sit down, read the body language, see the tics and the, the movements and motions, as opposed to all on camera? So what's the research tell us about that? Is this just a way for therapists to keep the money coming in by holding therapy sessions? I mean, talk about that.
Yeah. I don't know about the last. I'm sure there's been some of it, but actually, I've had more requests for time, not less. Just, I mean, from people that have been healthy and will be healthy when this passes. They're just trying to manage this time as healthy mentally and physically as they can. But you have to look at the research. And when you look at the research on, I laugh because it makes therapists so uneasy, and you go, look, you just got to be fair to the data. There is some artificial intelligence, I believe Stanford has done some of it, that has shown some really positive results. There are also some computer-based programs that show very positive results. I do some work with an organization that I just love. It's called Naturally Slim, and they do a lot on health and nutrition. And they have a significant amount that's web-based, but it's very thoughtfully done, that is engaging with people. And all of those interventions show very positive results for a lot of people. And when you look at the data, most of us, and this really, therapists don't like this either, most of us make change on our own. Now, we tend to do the same thing in therapy as we do on our own, but we all come up against things where we're stuck and we just need to hear ourselves think out loud, talk out loud, and see things we don't see. So we're trying to figure out, and we don't know yet, but I think this will help us figure it out. There are going to be some issues and challenges that we can treat through video conference and phone calls and 3, 4, 5 sessions. And I think there's just going to be some conditions that we have to see people face to face. And it's usually, as the severity increases, if you think about it, your primary care doc can treat some things in his office, but as it gets worse, you're going to have to be in a hospital. And I think the same is true for our psychological challenges, that we're going to be able to manage and treat some of those things through these mediums. And there are going to be some that we've still got to be face to face. But it absolutely can be beneficial as a bridge right now.
So Kevin, I know the research that comparing online or internet-based therapy, I mean, professional, not just go, search
Right.
the web and, ask questions, but those that have actually developed the program, that the research evidence suggests that it's just as effective in many circumstances. And so the point of, I guess, the comment is that you may have individuals that feel like they're not getting their money's worth, but in fact, what you're really after is the outcomes, not the time face to face, but you want the outcomes from a therapeutic session. And that can be achieved online even if it's not face-to-face online with somebody, a Zoom, it can still be a very effective. And it also is a reality of
Oh,
many of our clients that are sitting in places like Maybell, Colorado, for example. They have a business that is, they're 100 miles from someplace that might offer some services.
yes, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. Where I would go, the research so far has been small, sort of single site studies, and we have to be careful about that. But they have shown absolutely positive results, beneficial results. We've got to do it broader to know which individuals really benefit. But one of the things that I've noticed, it's been really interesting in these past 3 or 4 weeks, is that this environment, I think, has increased the likelihood of people having positive behavior change from doing telephonic or Zoom sessions, because we all sort of know it's either this or nothing. And man, this is fantastic compared to living like I've been living. And so it has been, we have seen some very beneficial results with people that we're having to see because they're high risk, where we're having to do phone sessions or Zoom sessions. But you're absolutely right. And I think the way to think about this is, look, I'm just trying to be at my best and help my employees be at their best. It's counseling. I need counsel right now. I may not need therapy, but man, I need some counsel of how to navigate some really difficult decisions right now.
Okay, we've got, I'm backed up on the questions, so I'm going to kind of breeze through them fairly quickly because we want to stay on time. But would you repeat the online resources that you talked about?
Yeah, and I'll send you, Jim, I'll send you some of those. They're PDFs and they're wonderful. There's one from the National Institute of Health on mood, on depression, that's really outstanding. There's also one on alcohol. We haven't talked about alcohol consumption a lot. You and I have talked about it and have an article on it that it, in particular to family-owned businesses, there seems to be an increased rate of alcohol consumption. Right now, our alcohol consumption is quite a bit higher than it was this time last year, roughly 45% increase. Again, don't binge anything, and alcohol I'm going to include as a food group. But National Institute of Health, and then there's one called Rethinking Drinking, which is outstanding. It's great information about, okay, am I drinking too much? And what are some strategies to reduce my alcohol intake? So there's a couple of those that I'll make sure I get to you.
Okay, and we will get those out to everybody that is on our distribution list for the podcast. So thank you for that, Kevin. Okay, let me get to a few of these real quick. Do you have an opinion on how much we should talk about COVID-19 and expose ourselves to information on it based on the impact it's having on our own mental health?
Look, it's more is not better. We know that for sure when it comes to anxiety. More is not better. What you're trying to do is land in the sweet spot of information that I need to act on. And I need enough, whether that's from CDC or from, I like Hopkins, Johns Hopkins. It puts out a lot of good information on a number of different things. But I'm going to limit how much I get, enough to act on, and start to think more critically of, okay, I'm listening and watching these things, but am I really is this actionable information? And if it's not, I'd think about stepping away from it. And just start to ask yourself, after reading, watching, how are you feeling? You feel better? You feel less anxious and worried, more anxious and worried? And if you're feeling more anxious and worried, you're consuming too many calories of information, right? We know how many calories are in a banana and how many steps we take, but how many minutes of COVID-19 coverage have you watched, and what's that done for you? Is it helping you? Is it hurting you? We have to be more proactively thoughtful about how much we're consuming, and is it actionable?
And it's not just the COVID, it's the satellite issues related to politics and, who's getting fired today or who's helping, and, all the things related to this that are playing in, just like the, Navy debacle that happened in the last week.
Right. And so you've got to remember is as somebody responsible for that organization employees, you have to guard what you're consuming in a very broad sense like you never have before. I remember, and I do a lot of work with addictions. I've done a lot of research work, a lot of treatment, and some time ago, the series Breaking Bad was on, and everybody was talking about it, and people were like, "Oh, have you seen it? You'd love it. You work in the field." Well, I do work in the field, and I work in the field a long time, and I finally, about season 2 or 3, watched an episode or two and quit watching it. And I said to somebody that asked me, I said, yeah, every day I see this and I deal with this. And when I watch that, it just brings all that up, and it's really disruptive to my mood and my mind. And I didn't watch it. That's how we have to look at the things we're watching and listening to now, because you've got responsibilities beyond just this virus. And so I'd be really thoughtful about what you're consuming, and look to consume things that you enjoy and distract you and you get lost in. So, for instance, yes, you can watch TV all you want. I'm a big fan of it. But reading engages our mind in a different way that is relaxing and distracting in a way that TV never will. Because when we read, we have to pull different parts of our brain, because what we in essence do is when we read, we visually create a movie. That's a lot of work, and it occupies a lot of time. You can't worry about tomorrow when you're reading a book that's enjoyable. So we have to be active in doing those things personally, because the people that work for you count on you and need you now more than they ever have.
Okay, thank you, Barton. Great question, very provocative. We have another question here. What advice can you offer business owners, managers on how we will come back to work safely? Some waiting at home, stay home, and so much more. But what do we do when we come back to work? I know in Texas we are shelter in place basically until May 1st. Again, this is just kind of information. A week ago, we got the shelter in place order to end on May 20th. They corrected it that night and made it like May 1st. Mm-hmm. This information that is moving and such, but how do we come back to work safely?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One, you're going to have to over communicate. And that, again, it's not only is it a good business practice, it helps manage people's mood and their stress level. And you also need to start, I think, communicating before they come back, that when we all go back, we are going to have to continue to practice many of these same things of sanitizing and social distancing. You touched on it earlier, and I work with a couple of physicians and that pretty knowledgeable about viruses and pandemics. They tend to go in waves. We're going back to work not because the virus is gone. We're going back because we've hopefully flattened the curve, but we have to go back in a thoughtful way so that our employees don't accidentally end up infected, because pandemics have phases. They have the initiation, escalation, de-escalation, maintenance, and you sort of wave through those things. And we are going to do that for the next 9 to 12 months. It will differ regionally. So as you look at employees that may be in different regions, we have to continue to exercise hand washing and distancing and being mindful that we may have to step back into rest in place. So I think realistic expectations for people, and even though we talk about it, when it settles in on us, it's really strange. So I would have things in the office. I would prepare your office ahead of time for notes, reminders, stations that people can have those things and do those things. I think that's going to be a huge thing. And then even when you step back in the office, you have to be thoughtful about meetings and interactions. It's going to take a lot more work than we realize, and it's not going to be treatment as usual. So I would communicate those things, especially on the front end, and still have all those same resources for mental health that we've been talking about already.
So one of the things that we've discussed among Ellie and Marianne and myself at Regeneration is getting people, when they are ready to return to work, to consider allocating a block of time. Just have at it, talk about the COVID, talk about someone that they know that didn't come out of the ICU unit, a friend of a friend who passed away or whatever, but go ahead and allow that to happen, and then shut it down, go back to work, and maybe look at controlling rather than going back to their workstation and having this distracted conversation going on among one at a time. Just someone's distracted at all times. So it might be something worth considering. Would you support that kind of idea from a psychological standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. It is there. Talk about it, but remember, we're at work. I want to talk about it, but I also want it to be productive and contained. And that's the piece that you have to be mindful of as the employer or manager is, no, we're not going to spend an hour doing that, but we do need to talk about where you at. And then always talk about, we just did it in our clinical meeting that we had where we talked about, somebody said, okay, hey, what's one thing you've done in the past week that actually helped you? And it was great. I mean, there was stuff you'd never think of. And I was like, God, that was really fantastic. Do the same. If you're going to talk about, hey, how are you doing? And how are you with things that are just difficult and challenging? Also talk about, hey, what have you done in the past week that helped you, that distracted you or helped you sleep? And you can focus it on sleep, on physical activity, on whatever it is. But yes, no, I think that's a great idea, and it's going to be necessary for the next 6 to 9 months.
Okay. So we're beginning to wrap up. I've got one last question, comment, and I'm going to ad-lib a little bit of this because this is in line with something that I wanted to ask you myself. But Kevin, you mentioned that there's been a 43 to 45% increase in alcohol same time year over year from last year for the last 3 weeks. Alcohol consumption is going up. In line with that, our highest authority in Dallas County is a gentleman by the name of Clay Jenkins. He's the county judge. And he reported 3 weeks ago at kind of the beginning of this that sadly they've discovered that there's also been an enormous spike in child abuse. And, you know, children staying at home all day, parents staying home, whatever, child abuse is moving up. Wow.
I know.
Talk about, you know, a train wreck on top of, you know, another crisis and disaster. So any comments about that?
Yeah, and you go, you know, why is that the case? And you go, well, you don't have a drinking problem. I'm not saying you're an alcoholic, but you definitely have a problem with the way you're drinking. And what you see are the effects of isolation, of unhealthy things that we didn't even realize we needed so much in our life, like a routine and structure. You also see the effects of stress on our finances and on our health. And again, the human mind does not do well in isolation and with boredom, and we will end up using a substance and asking it to do something for us. And whenever we ask a substance, whether it's alcohol or pot or pain medications or sleeping medications, when we ask it to do something, meaning help me feel less stressed, don't drink. Now, if you want to have something to drink because you're having barbecue out back and you want to have a beer or you want to have wine with a particular fish, that's fine. But when you're asking it to help you sleep and deal with stress, you do not want to come out of this with a problem. Now, the good news is it takes a long time to develop a problem, but you don't want to come out of this with habits that are unhealthy. And the worst part of that is you don't develop the psychological muscles that you're going to need for the next 6 months, 12 months. Alcohol, unfortunately, works in the short term. It doesn't work in long term. And one of the main symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression is agitation and irritability. So.
Okay, well, Dr. Gilliland, has been a delight, just a true pleasure to have you on our podcast today. I do want to end the program on a little bit of a higher note than the last question related to, and that is that in our follow-up email to everybody, we will include Dr. Gilliland's email address. You feel free to contact him directly. Feel free to contact us, and we'll get in touch with him on your behalf. Just get in touch. That's the main thing.
Yes.
And in addition to that, we will send out some materials and some book recommendations that you might, in addition to Struggle Well, Live Well, there's some other materials out there that have some great value. And also you'll have a link to a television program from the Foundation for Responsible Television. And Dr. Gilliland, Dr. Cofield, Michael Cofield, and myself did a program on positive psychology and what is it that causes some people to flourish and live with great resilience as opposed to not flourishing and feeling locked and caved in. So there'll be a link to that television program. I think it was a wonderful program. It came on about a year ago, 2 years ago. Please take a look at it and enjoy it. And that leaf blower is back. So with that, Dr. Gilliland, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and efforts this morning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys.
And I will end the program for us all now.